The Gaza Strip is once again engulfed in a devastating cycle of violence. On March 18, 2025, Israel launched airstrikes across the Gaza Strip, ending a fragile 2-month ceasefire with Hamas. The strikes have resulted in a heavy toll on civilians, with hundreds killed, including women and children. Many more are injured. This recent escalation of violence comes after a breakdown of the January 2025 ceasefire, which was intended to lead to a lasting truce between Israel and Hamas. The collapse of the ceasefire has plunged Gaza into a humanitarian crisis of catastrophic proportions. The already dire situation in the Strip has been exacerbated by the recent violence. The ongoing blockade, in place for over 2 decades, has crippled Gaza's economy and severely restricted the movement of people and goods. This has left the population of over 2 million Palestinians extremely vulnerable. The recent airstrikes have targeted various locations in Gaza, including residential areas. The strikes have destroyed homes, infrastructure, and essential facilities. The targeting of homes has led to a significant increase in civilian casualties. The destruction of infrastructure has further crippled Gaza's already fragile water, electricity, and healthcare systems. The international community has condemned the violence and called for an immediate ceasefire. However, these calls have gone unheeded. The situation in Gaza demands urgent attention from the international community. A failure to act will have catastrophic consequences for the Palestinian population in Gaza. The world must not stand idly by as Gaza descends into further chaos and suffering. The humanitarian situation in Gaza was already precarious before the recent escalation of violence. Years of blockade and recurrent conflicts have left the Strip's infrastructure in ruins. The healthcare system is on the verge of collapse. Essential services like water and electricity are scarce. The recent violence has only exacerbated these pre-existing vulnerabilities, turning an already dire situation into a full-blown humanitarian catastrophe. The most pressing concern is the rising number of casualties. Hospitals are overwhelmed with the injured. They lack the necessary medical supplies and equipment to treat them adequately. There is an urgent need for medical supplies, including essential medicines, surgical equipment, and blood. The blockade has severely hampered the delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Essential supplies like food, water, and medicine are in critically short supply. The already limited access to clean water has worsened, increasing the risk of waterborne diseases. The lack of adequate sanitation facilities further exacerbates the health risks for the population, particularly children. The psychological toll on the people of Gaza cannot be overstated. Years of living under siege, coupled with recurrent outbreaks of violence, have had a devastating impact on mental health. The constant fear and uncertainty have created a pervasive sense of hopelessness, particularly among the youth. The international community must address this often overlooked aspect of the crisis and provide psychosocial support to those affected. The international community has responded to the escalating violence in Gaza with a mix of condemnation and calls for restraint. The United Nations has called for an immediate ceasefire and urged both sides to exercise maximum restraint. The UN has also emphasized the need to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. The UN has reiterated its commitment to supporting a negotiated 2-state solution, which would establish an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel. Several countries have condemned the violence and called for an end to the hostilities. However, concrete action to enforce a ceasefire and address the root causes of the conflict remains elusive. The international community appears divided on how to handle the situation. Some nations are calling for a tougher stance against Hamas, while others are urging Israel to show restraint and ease the blockade on Gaza. Global protests have erupted in solidarity with the Palestinians. People worldwide are taking to the streets to denounce the violence and call for an end to the Israeli occupation. These protests highlight the growing international outrage over the situation in Gaza. They underscore the need for a just and lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Despite the international outcry, a ceasefire remains elusive. This is due in part to the deep mistrust between the parties involved, as well as the complex political dynamics both within Israel and the Palestinian territories. The lack of progress towards a political solution only perpetuates the cycle of violence and suffering. The ongoing crisis in Gaza is a stark reminder of the urgent need for a just and lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The international community cannot afford to stand idly by as the situation deteriorates further. The cycle of violence, retaliation, and suffering must end. The immediate priority is to secure an immediate and unconditional ceasefire to end the violence and protect civilian lives. All parties involved must commit to de-escalation and engage in meaningful dialogue. The international community must exert pressure to ensure that this happens. Beyond the immediate ceasefire, the international community must work to address the underlying causes of the conflict. This includes ending the occupation, lifting the blockade on Gaza, and finding a just solution to the refugee issue. The two-state solution, based on the 1967 borders, remains the most viable path to peace. This would involve the creation of an independent and sovereign Palestinian state alongside Israel. Both states would coexist peacefully within secure and recognized borders. The international community must demonstrate the political will and commitment necessary to bring about a just and lasting peace. The Palestinian people deserve to live in dignity, security, and freedom. The world must not fail them.